Hello there, I'm Nathalia Melo, your unfiltered fit BFF. Mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who truly understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify your fitness journey so you can lose fat, regain your confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Come on, let's go. Hello there, fam. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. I'm Nathalia Melo, your host. And today I have an amazing guest who is likely to stay as a regular guest on this podcast, who is our head coach in the Powerhouse Academy, Jennifer Lawson. Coach Jen, for all the members of the Powerhouse Academy who are listening to this podcast. She is a licensed counselor. She has over 17 years of experience in fitness. She has worked on the gym floor. She has done fitness competitions. She is a mother of two. I think that this conversation is going to be incredibly valuable because not only she has all this experience, but she also works on her private practice as a licensed counselor with teens and young adults ranging from 13 to 25, which is going to bring a very good context to the conversation that we're going to be having today. But first, let's welcome her. Welcome, Jen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation because I think it's so important that parents in particular take awareness to what we're going to be speaking about.
100%. And if you're curious about what we're talking about, I'm going to start with telling a little bit of a story that is my own story to be had. And that's a pattern that I see being repeated. Growing up, talked about this several times. And again, this is no shade. My mom, I know that she was the best she could with what she had. But my mom was yo-yo dieter. Every single time she was doing a diet and she'd lose the weight, gain the weight, make comments about her body in front of me, make comments about my body. My body was like a free-for-all, like a billboard I think in the Latino culture as well. And there are other cultures. I think the Asian culture and Eastern European also has a lot of this extra comfort with making comments about your children's or children in the family's body. And one thing that I started to notice is that, especially as I grew, how much that shaped my relationship with food, my relationship with my own body. And it required a lot of work for me to not only perceive that, but also change the narrative on how my kids perceive their own bodies and their relationship with food. And it's interesting because with our members, I'll be speaking with someone who is like 7 years old. And these ladies will remember what their dad said about their bodies when they were 6. It's wild. So, Jen, what are you seeing from a clinical standpoint with young adults that we can pinpoint to an extent as a byproduct of this too open conversation about physical appearance and disordered eating patterns?
Well, ultimately, I think because we are of the generation where fitness really came into such the forefront of our focus, right? And, while you could reference Jack LaLanne and Jane Fonda as being present with our parents, especially in America, I remember them being present when I was growing up. We took it to a whole new level as we went through it, but we didn't realize the detriment of the eating habits and patterns that we adopted while we were going through it because we were ultimately looking for acceptance. So I am of the generation that is raising the teenagers and young adults now. And what I see in amongst my current peers, if you will, is there is just this, fitness and eating habits and how you reference food and actually restrict food is so common because you have to maintain an appearance. You have to have an aesthetic that is in alignment with the industry that took over while we were in our mid-20s and early 30s. And now that I'm into my 40s, now I'm seeing, again, us raising the byproduct of.
I actually would say that we are already a byproduct of a diet culture. Sure. I think that our kids, they are, I think, the byproduct of a diet culture masked as healthy.
We were looking for the answer.
Yeah, like our parents' generation, the goal was to be skinny, period, the end. Then I think that our generation, it's kind of like slapping lipstick in a pig and be like, oh no, it's healthy. And then it's kind of, now we're like talking more about the orthorexia tendencies that I'm seeing.
Right. And with teenagers and young adults, what they're doing is they're adopting now these new types of disordered eating habits, like you had referenced, orthorexia, and then adopting the trends that follow that with the diets because they saw their parents, our generation, doing it to become healthy in comparison to just being heroin chic thin that we saw.
Even like there is that Vogue article talking about the diet that it was like cigarettes and coffee. Do you remember seeing that?
Well, can I tell that? So that is my history in growing up. My mother was the tab soda, smoking cigarette. And the comments I would get was, if you're feeling just a little heavy today, just don't eat for a few days. And then she would reference the prescription diet pills that she would be able to get. And she said, if anybody could ever get them for you, just go ahead, take a couple. It's okay. So I was told that it's okay as a 19, 20-year-old, even if you get an illegal prescription for a prescription drug, just take it. It's okay because you'll look better for it.
And I think that obviously with social media and with a more, I think, open conversation is a bit of a catch-22. I think that we are kind of like in that fork on the road kind of moment because we have an abundance of information, which brings awareness. But at the same time, the abundance of information also brings information that shouldn't be spread. Like you see a lot on TikTok, like people celebrating not eating for 4 days. And like I actually saw a reel the other day, not a reel, it was like a full video of a guy saying that telling people to not eat anything for 21 days because it was the best thing that the person could do for muscle building. And I was like, that is some mental gymnastics going on there. So my point is that we are having the normalization of talking about the problem. And then I think that now what our generation is shifting to, it's kind of like, oh, you know, my mom used to talk about my body. I don't talk about my kid's body. And they think that that solves the problem. So can you tell from your experience again what you are seeing? I think that we can even do a blend of what you're seeing with your teens and what you're seeing with the parents of the teens. How are you seeing that correlation of, oh, I don't think that I'm impacting my kids because I'm not saying anything about them. But meanwhile, like they come from a severe disordered eating pattern and extreme and the body shame and the body dysmorphia and all of that jazz.
Well, what parents don't realize is when they might not be speaking to the specific topic, but what they are doing is displaying behavior patterns that kids observe, pick up on, and absolutely mimic. Because, of course, parents are the initial role model. So what ends up happening is the kids just completely copy what their parents are doing.
Whenever you say displaying behavior patterns, can you walk us through some of the behavior patterns that you're referencing there so people can become aware as well?
The absolute fad diets, the keto diets, and the things of that nature where they're completely restricting a macronutrient that's a necessity, especially for teenagers. Because, of course, as we're growing through our life phases, we need macronutrients to support every phase of growth. And then we have our children who involve themselves in extracurricular activities where they might need actually a surplus of calories, but they see their parents restricting themselves so significantly. And they think that that's the way to get a look, not realizing that they have to also perform at a different level of intensity and they're not. So they just start mimicking their parents' behavior. And then also, listen, let's call a spade a spade. Yes, social media is very, very obviously present in all our lives. And if they see their parents copying something they found on social media, the kids are going to jump and look to see what that is and do the same. So it's just a matter of ultimately recognizing our own behavior patterns and see if it is affecting our children.
What are the things that you think that parents do? I am a parent and you are a parent and we are personal friends. So, you know, we're not here holding like the sign that we are the poster child of perfect parenting. But if there is something that I can learn on how to avoid things that might lead to my kids having to have extra therapy in the future, I'm here for it. And I think that this is something that is very easy to spot and very easy to address. What are the other things that you see parents doing that they might not even realize? Could it be, oh, I'm not going to have that ice cream because I'm on a diet, or I'm not going to have that pizza. What are the other things?
Labeling foods.
What do you mean by that?
Labeling foods as good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. And again, restricting carbohydrates or going completely to the far end of the spectrum as only eating red meat for the carnivore diet, things of that nature, to where they're completely limiting the thought process behind what food actually is. So I speak to a ton of parents who say, well, I don't keep cookies in the house or candy because I don't want my kids having it. But then all of a sudden, when the kids are put around it, they binge on it. When they go to a grandparent's house or an aunt or a friend's house. So it's little things like that that we think we're doing our kids a service when it's actually a disservice.
I love that you mentioned this, because we also see this in adults that find themselves in, because I think that we have a very unique perspective because we work with the parents and you work with the age group that our members are parents too. And I think that that's why this conversation is so valuable, because I feel like people don't understand how much their own behavior truly impacts how their children are going to act. So can you tell me why calling foods good and bad? Why is that detrimental? What is the problem with that?
Because you're ultimately stigmatizing food, right? You're creating this subconscious reaction that certain foods are not supplying a need. They do service a need that we have, even if a cookie may not be the most nutrient-dense food, but it's supporting an ultimate need that we do have at certain points in our life.
Even if that thing that is supporting is a connection with their peers, not even talking about from a nutritional standpoint, but it's speaking more from a sociological and behavioral standpoint. One thing that because I went down a rabbit hole and we were talking before the podcast started rolling, the body of evidence on the impact that parents' behavior has on children, mind-blowing.
Significant.
And I found this one here. Let me see. So although parents may or may not conscientiously pressure their children to maintain a low body weight, their children's perception of this pressure increases the likelihood of weight dissatisfaction and eating disorder. This is a quote from an actual research, which I'm happy to link everything in the show notes. And then there was another one here that I found. Mothers that were more concerned about their child's weight are more likely to restrict their child eating, and others have shown parental assessment of their child's weight to be a significant predictor of their child's poor body image.
So, and then I, of course, have the research to back up this complementary statements to yours is mothers and fathers who engaged in weight-related conversations just amongst themselves. Their children were listening and they ended up having higher risk of an eating disorder or disordered eating habit.
What would you define as a weight-related conversations? And obviously, I know what you're saying, but I just want to make sure that we have clarity for those that are listening to us. What would qualify something as a weight-related conversation?
Something so simple as a mom having a conversation with her husband, spouse, significant other about how she looks in a certain outfit, saying, if I was only thinner, or I would look so much better if I was this way, or when I was able to wear this, I was 5 pounds lighter. Simple things like that we don't realize our kids are listening to. And they are. They listen and they hear everything. Or the way we look at ourselves in the mirror. And then just have an off-color comment to anyone who's around us, whether it be our significant other or even a family member. Just be like, oh, I don't like how I look in this. I look so frumpy. Or I look like, a sausage stuffed in a potato sack or something.
And I think that we can even go a little bit farther with the conversation with the non-verbal kind of behaviors, like, the consequences of not feeling your best. Right. And the things that we hear all the time from, the ladies that are reaching out to us is, I don't take photos with my kids. I hide from photos. I avoid social events. I don't wear certain clothes. I don't get in a pool. Like, I don't know when was the last time that you went to like a pool? Obviously you are in New York and it's frozen hell right now. And so is Texas, but I digress. But I always pay attention, and every time that I go somewhere where there is a pool or there is, the beach, 9 out of 10 times is the dad playing with the kids. Have you noticed that?
Always. Yes. Because we spend the summer at the beach because I live right on the shore. And yeah, it's the moms are sitting down, actually covering themselves. And the dads are just free balling it.
Yeah, I know, like, hey. So how do you think that, because I feel like women also don't understand how that has an impact on the perception of their children. So what is your take? I don't know if this particular point that we're talking has a research to back it up. So we're going to be extrapolating here, I believe, from the data. But what has been your experience from your work with teens and young adults?
Well, ultimately, it removed the eating patterns from that entire concept. And just when a mother chooses to not engage with her children in a fun, loving, playful type of capacity like that, it actually tells the child subconsciously that there's something wrong with them, that their parents don't want to involve themselves with the kid. Like, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't mommy want to play with me?
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't mommy want to take pictures with me? Is there something wrong with me, possibly physically? Do I not look okay for mommy to want to be present with me?
Mm-hmm.
So it trickles into different psychological concerns that I experience with the teenagers too.
Because the person becomes more removed, like the parent. And a lot of times is the mother. Because I find, and again, it's speculation, because we do have the bias of working primarily with women in the Powerhouse Academy. But I mean, I hardly ever see my husband, for example, overly concerned whether or not he gained 5 pounds or 10 pounds. It is a pattern that is mostly visible and real with women.
Which I feel is just that society's the nature of the beast, right? It's always been women are to present themselves in a certain way. And but it also, let's call a spade a spade. We want to look good. We do.
And there is nothing wrong with that. I think that's one thing that we have to acknowledge, is that there is nothing wrong with wanting to look good. I mean, I like to look hot as shit.
Ditto.
But I think I think the conversation that we're having here is how you're getting there and at what cost.
Right. And recognizing that, your behaviors that you think are just personal to you are not being observed and retained by our children. Even just your attitude towards food. And, men are starting to teeter into this too, because I'm actually seeing it, as you know, my son and daughter both box. Young men are now starting to actually have this reaction to food because ultimately their mothers and the way they treat food too.
There is a research that I saw that mentions that there is now an increased negative impact of the mother's behavior on boys.
Well, because if you think about it from a science standpoint, boys' DNA lives inside their mother forever, for the longevity of the mother's life. Girls don't. Female DNA does not live inside the mom. It lives inside the mom for 60 to 70 years, but boys' DNA lives forever inside the mom. The connection is that deep.
Interesting.
So I guess that's where mama's boy comes from, that term. But anyway, I digress on.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. That is interesting. That I'm going to go in a slight tangent. Not very much, but I expected a conversation between both of us to have tangents. But because I saw a post that triggered me, and I'm going to read it to you, because I actually just did a live on Instagram about that, because I'm salty about it. So it basically is a photo of a woman drowning, holding her baby out of the water. And the copy, I'm going to be quick here, is like, this image can be interpreted as a mother's sacrifice and unconditional love. The mother immersed in water holds her child above the surface, even as she herself is drowning or facing great hardships and challenges. It represents the idea that mothers often sacrifice their own well-being to ensure the survival and well-being of their children. It illustrates the emotional, physical, and psychological toll that many mothers endure, keeping their children safe and protected. It is a powerful representation of the sacrifice, resilience, and unconditional love that many mothers feel. Now, I am not going to say my opinion on that. And guys, this is completely off the cuff. And I know that Jen has now seen my video. So she might not agree with me. We're about to find out. What are your thoughts when I read you this and when you see this photo?
I immediately think of when you're on an airplane, what do they tell you to do? Put the mask on yourself first before anyone else, because ultimately you're not saving anybody by behaving in that manner.
So why do you think that there is this? Because I think that there is a big correlation between this that I just read and we talked about and the mimicking of behavior around food and around fitness and things like that. Because whenever you're constantly drowning, you are going to gravitate towards that more all or nothing strategy because you feel like your time is like you only have this one time to and go all out. So how do you feel that these societal expectations that a mother's worth comes from sacrificing and being a martyr? And this is an idea that is widely celebrated, and I don't know why.
Well, here I am. I'm thinking you're not being a martyr. It's actually the converse of that statement, because by you sacrificing yourself, you're not saving your children. You're actually imposing negative behavior on your children. You're teaching them that it's okay to engage in negative behavior at the cost of yourself. There's always a cost to benefit ratio. And then you're ultimately not at your best for your children, and your children need you to be at your best. It's a false statement.
I'm right there with you. I'm right there and I think that is what so many people, women especially, fail to see. But I feel like it is because it is such an imposed, absolute. I remember, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but I remember, after I had my kids, I would go to the gym and everybody was always like, that is babysitting, huh? It's kind of like when you have a kid, you are not allowed to take care of yourself. I've had comments on social media of people judging me and saying that I'm a bad mother because I take care of my body and by default, I must neglect my children.
Yeah, I luckily I did not receive that negative response. That's horrible though. But what I do see is that by my discipline to myself, even at the minimal levels, my children are displaying proper habits and taking care of themselves already and being disciplined within practices that I need them to be disciplined in for success in life.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people don't see on the flip side. And again, I could go off on a massive tangent, but I won't right now.
Oh, no, I'm all about the tangents. And I think that another thing that we are not talking about is that the conversation here is the mimicking of behavior that children, like as young as 6, there was one thing here that I saw. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. That states that children between age 6 and 11 years old have been shown to hold anti-fat attitudes, a preference for thinness, and a fear for becoming fat. In addition, Flannery, Schrader and Chrysler, 1996, that's the study, found children as young as 6 years old to display not only a preference for thinness, but also a disordered eating, such as throwing up on purpose and eating, and an understanding of the relationship between eating and weight. Thus, by learning that messages the mother may be sending their very young children, we may be able to learn how children learn to emulate typically adult stereotypes and beliefs. This tells me is that if they're mimicking this kind of behavior, whenever we are acting in a way that we are not worthy of care and attention, that is what our children are going to replicate.
100%. And 6 years old, it's interesting because that's exactly when the brain starts to retain and comprehend information in general. So that's when they begin to be able to understand what a parent is doing and then put into play why they're doing it. And then again, that will translate to them and how they perceive themselves and take care of themselves going forward. And then by 10, 11 years old is when their brain is fully capable of translating that into their own behavior patterns. And then, of course, I start coming in around 12, 13 years old, and that's when the eating disorder is already full blown.
That is so interesting. I have a question because obviously whenever you're working with a young adult and teens, if it is a teen, I'm sure that the parents to an extent are involved in having conversations with you because it is a family affair. It's not just addressing the parents. And with frequency, obviously I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your loyalty to your patients, but what is the frequency that you see a correlation of this martyr syndrome or people pleasing tendencies from kids of moms who have this martyr syndrome that we just discussed from
the post? I would say it's an easy 70% of teens that I work with.
That the parent is the mother that completely neglected herself, her self-care, her well-being, her about 70%.
Yep. And then all of a sudden, though, at some point in time, realized that she was doing that and it was time to then go into the extreme and then neglected her child on the flip side of it all. So it's interesting because it does take a turn. And then now they're neglecting their child to overcompensate for what they should have just been doing from the start.
Do you think that there is a layer of resentment there?
Absolutely. and then resentment both ways between the mother to the child and then the child to the parent.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that resentment exists? And again, I think that everything that we're talking about is in a more hypothetical, but obviously you do have the experience and we're not judging anybody. We want this podcast to be about information that you can absorb and take action on how you can create changes within your own household to, raise decent children.
Yeah, and just to bring awareness to how much of an absolute dilemma it is. I would call it an epidemic for sure, because these children are suffering so significantly in their own now ultimate self-worth because of it. So as far as the resentment goes, back to that part of your question, the parents themselves are resenting their children because they felt as though they had to give themselves up in order to raise their children to a certain point to when they felt they were self-sufficient. And then the children begin to resent their parents because they're also not receiving the right information on how to care for self, number one, as they hit those social years of teenagehood. And then they then also start to resent their parents because then they become removed and disconnected from their kids as they're trying to reinvent themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just remaining very present within themselves the entire process of motherhood.
And there is also probably a layer of resentment because it is something I think we've seen working in the Powerhouse Academy with older women, like not older, but like more like not teen, not young adults, a bit beyond that, but for having that kind of parenting to get into adulthood and not being properly equipped to deal with life and like just how life is.
And then the resentment from spouses and significant others too, that starts to form.
Why?
Because ultimately, when you are done raising your children and you've released them into the wild, as I say, you haven't nurtured the proper relationship with yourself to nurture the relationship with your significant other or spouse. And then you're completely lost in the sauce.
So what you're telling me is that whenever, for example, if there is a woman that her sole purpose is sacrifice, give herself, that means that she's probably not giving anything to the marriage. And that's the example that the child has and grows up around. And then whenever that child, now an adult, goes and gets married, that person is not properly equipped to navigate a healthy, because again, being married and having a healthy marriage are two completely different things.
100%. And while it's off the topic of food in general, it is just the idea of how our kids are constantly absorbing our behavior patterns as their parents, and it translates through their life.
You know what, Jen? I would challenge the idea that it is not connected to fitness and nutrition. And again, I might be making a leap here, but I think because we hear the same things with the adults, I might be onto something. Do you feel that maybe a lot of times this overcompensation with this sacrifice and like this martyrdom, I think that's how you pronounce it, like martyr syndrome, that it's just like give, also comes from a lack of self-worth for not taking care of themselves. And then and I see this also even with people that have been fit for a long period of time, women that have like a history of being fit, then they find themselves in a season of life that they don't know how to navigate because everything has always been so extreme. And then you have kids, you have a career, you have a husband, and then it's like, fuck, like I can't spend 3 hours in the gym anymore, so I'm not going to do anything at all. And they don't like how they look. And then as a way to quote unquote overcompensate for not bringing the hotness, they overcompensate with that servitude that is like extra and extra. And then it just becomes the trend.
Absolutely. And then what that ends up creating on a different spectrum is children who ultimately have, this might stir a couple pots, but whatever, entitlement factors. And then what they're doing is unable to actually find success in their own personal lives because they've become so dependent on the parents who have just served their every ultimate quote unquote need, where it's really the want, but it became the need of the mom or the dad because they didn't know how to ultimately balance all facets of life.
They kind of stopped being mom and dad and became just parents, and that's all they became. And to kind of distract themselves from addressing a problem that was in the marriage, but not really in the marriage, within themselves and not feeling their best, because that is something that we see a lot, like intimacy, a significant decline in intimacy, not because of the kids, but because one of the spouses or sometimes both of them are unhappy with how they look. And then they use the kids as a shield. Oh, I'm busy with the kids. Oh, I'm so tired. Oh my God. And the relationship starts to grow apart. And the root cause of that, like fundamentally speaking, is a lack of care for their health, fitness, and body.
The relationship with themselves. They never nurture the relationship with themselves. And you can't nurture any other relationship properly if you're not nurturing the relationship with yourself properly. But that first then comes to you having to recognize that you're going to have to step away from everything that feels comfortable, because ultimately taking care of your children is natural. It's instinctual. So it's easier per se than ultimately taking care of yourself.
Yeah. And I find as well is that easy to hide behind something that you know that you're good at, which that's something that we see with a lot of people. It's, they're good in their career, so they put their head down with work. I'm guilty of that. They know that they're good at being a parent. Then they give 100% to that, and they kind of distract themselves and don't prioritize the fitness and the nutrition because it is not something that they even know how to get started. They think they know because they watched videos on Instagram, but the application of it is much different than the mental masturbation of watching a bunch of crap on social media.
And then I can speak for myself personally. I was really good at training. So what did I do? I went completely all or nothing with that. And it was hours and hours because I was really good at it and actually neglected what I should have been paying more attention to. So there's finding that balance with it all, finding that definite balance with it all.
So, oh my God, we could go so many directions with this conversation, because I really feel that the main point that it's important to drive home here is that a lot of people look at health and fitness as just like a vanity thing. Oh no, it's beyond vanity. Like, we are talking about the negative impact that it has in your direct relationships with your kids, probably with your boss, with your spouse, the negative impact that it has on how your kids grow up to being functioning members of society.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And ultimately the relationship that you have with yourself of, a lot of times accepting things in life that you wouldn't dare tolerate. But because now you removed that care for self, you're willing to tolerate shit that you wouldn't before.
Right. Because you've diminished your self-worth. And now your self-respect is compromised too.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting whenever we're talking about resentment, and this, because I mentioned to someone that this ultimate sacrifice of completely, bearing yourself and giving everything to your kids and your family leads to resentment. And I was actually ostracized as I was like, oh my, like, how dare you say this? And I'm like, it is very real. We see this on a daily. And that's the thing with, like, for example, with social media that I was talking, that is great for information, but it's because you're looking at perfectly curated ideas of life. And, nobody's talking about the hardships of the sacrifices and the costs and the impact that is having on you in other areas of your life.
Right. And it's difficult because, of course, social media is going to filter in certain thought processes that seem to be widely accepted, but ultimately are detrimental to, and this is the other thing too, is a lot of times people don't just take stock in their own home. They look to validate their choices by outside perspectives. I have a tendency to go to Eastern medicine for a little more insight because I do like to pull from all facets to make sure that I'm, just clear on my thought process. And, within that, there was a couple of different clinics between, the Middle East and then, of course, Eastern Europe, and then as well, just Central Europe, that have clinics specifically for children who suffer from disordered eating habits, but also just psychological concerns. And it all states very clearly in their studies that it's the parents' attitudes that dictate ultimately the well-being of their growth patterns. And if we ever looked at depression, and where depression is much higher, it's in America versus these other countries that I referenced. And it is because ultimately there is a confusion on how to properly take care of self.
The extremes.
The extremes.
So now let's see if we can help people in give some strategies on things, action items and things that they can start doing that can help them, with themselves in their relationships. And most importantly, with being a good example for their kids, which I think that it is the main piece, although we went in a few tangents, but I think that we need to come back to the negative impact that it has on kids from as young as 6, which blew my mind when I saw that. So what are things that parents can start doing now? Let's say if they have a child that is 13 and below.
Family dinners are huge. That's been proven to be a very impactful tradition to implement. Again, I should say implement again, because it was all the common standard.
Yeah.
Early American times. But family dinners with all macros, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, people, not limiting the food options. And then also not clearing the table super quick and not rushing through that dinner.
Interesting. Which is hard. Like, we have to acknowledge that this is something that is hard in today's culture with like activities and things like that. Not clearing the table, meaning like not rushing around and things like that, taking the moment to chat.
Right. And leaving the food on the table. If there are leftovers, leave it on the table, not warning your children through it, saying, you don't need any more than that. Children are very instinctual until they are taught otherwise. So, or if you ever noticed, or if you have an infant or toddler, you can't technically force feed them. Right.
Oh, trust me. Because Nico, he was so hard to eat. I've tried and that shit backfired on me real quick. So do not recommend. 0 stars.
There are exceptions, not the rule. But, ultimately, I remember trying to chase my savage around, my child. And that's one of the things, too, is telling our children when and what to eat at those young ages, at those primitive ages of 3, 4, 5 years old. Trying to implement those types of rules, food rules, is pulling away from their just intuitive opportunity of eating when hungry, sleeping when tired, moving when they have energy type concepts. So that's another thing. Using fat as an insult, not necessarily towards your children, but in general to other people, or just judgmental comments towards anything in general, right? Really paying attention to our word choices. We're all guilty of having those moments where
we're not as nice as we should have.
Yeah. And I've had to backtrack and apologize.
Yeah, but being cognizant of the language that you use, I'm not a perfect parent. I'm going to rephrase it with saying that, but this thing around food is something that we are very intentional. I think because I'm the product of, and we see this day in and day out. We don't talk about, oh, we're on a diet. Oh, this food is good. This food is bad. Oh, you're not allowed to eat this. No, you can eat whatever. Like, my kids have ice cream at least 5 nights out of the week.
Oh, mine too. It's always in the house. And people, they question, they're like, you have ice cream and cookie? I'm like, yes.
Yes.
And they have what they want. They give themselves their own bowl, and it's never overindulging. And if they don't want the whole bowl, they actually put it in the sink and they're done.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. So this is for kids 13 and under. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add to that?
I do. There's a couple of different things that just have been clinically proven as far as, warning children about weight gain, making those comments.
Not do it. So you're not supposed to do that.
Nope, you're not supposed to make comments as far as, don't eat too much. You don't want to eat too much food. You don't want to feel overfull or uncomfortable with your food. That's when you actually start to bring on the concept of body dysmorphia.
So what, like, if there is a child that is gaining weight, what is a parent to do?
I would actually ask them to please step back and take a look at what type of behaviors they're personally displaying first.
Okay.
Because your children learn from you. They don't learn from anywhere else, but you first and foremost.
Yeah. And I think that where a lot of people get tripped up on that is like, oh no, but I eat super healthy and like I'm slim, but maybe that's the problem. The obsessive behavior there might be a pattern of obsession or extremes that it's being reflected on the kid, and the kid is gaining the weight. Is that what you're saying?
That, and what is your definition of healthy? The idea of good, labeling foods good and bad. Never label foods good and bad to your children.
Yep.
Or healthy or unhealthy.
It's funny because schools do this a lot, and it drove me bananas. Like, oh, we cannot have like donuts because they're bad. And I'm like, who the hell said that they were bad? No, you know what? We're going to have all the donuts now. Like, he really, and this was when my kids were like 4 or 5 years old. And I'm like, you don't tell a 4 and 5 year old that donuts are bad and cookies are bad and sugar is bad. Like, stop it. I lost my mind.
Well, if we think about when the obesity pandemic hit America, when was it? In the 90s, when they started to sit there and limit foods in the school systems. This is controversial and open for discussion privately if you would like. But when I was in elementary school, we walked around the halls with donuts on our birthdays and gave them out.
Mm-hmm.
And obesity was not a concern in the 80s.
Yeah. There was a lot more movement too. There were longer recesses and things like that, which I think is the whole system, the way the whole system is set up. So for kids 13 and above, because now you're getting the preteen, teen, and obviously if there is already a pattern of, disordered eating behavior in the house, the kids probably have picked up by then. So what should parents not do with kids? Actually, what parents should do, should they do for the kids 14 and above?
Do not engage in conversation about their weight with them directly. Do not, you said what they should do, and I'm going on the do not because ultimately it's the same thing. Look to just engage with them in proper habits and behavior patterns. Be their tag team effort. Be their partner in movement. Be their partner in how to create the proper meals and eat the proper foods in moderation, because ultimately at 13, 14, 15 and onwards, you can have the ability to overindulge and choose different types of foods that are palatable rather than necessities. So it's a matter of, then you become a team.
But it's interesting because a while back I had a call with a lady and her son was severely overweight. I'm talking about like 300 pounds plus as a teen. And so was she and everybody else in the family. And as I was talking with her, she kept on repeating that her concern was with her son. Oh, because I want to help him. And I'm like, the best way that you can help him is by helping you. If you are expecting your child to do something that you're not willing to do yourself, especially when we're talking about a teen, it's not going to work.
Well, it goes back to that self-reflection. So if you do have a child that's displaying these negative behavior patterns, what's the root cause of it? Mm-hmm. You have to do a root cause reflection.
No, 100%. Anything else for the 13 plus that you'd like to add, Jen?
Be present in your kids' lives at that age. Have the open conversations, the uncomfortable conversations as far as what's going on in school. What are the relationships with your friends like? And then also being very, very active in their social life as far as not limiting them or helicopter parent, if you will, limiting their activity on electronics and social media and being involved in their lives.
Yeah.
Being present is really what it comes down to. And that's going to allow you to sit there and also do a lot of self-reflecting on yourself as a parent.
I love that. And what can the parents themselves do to be a better role model? And I'm going to start and then you can piggyback on that. Especially now as we're starting the year, we see women basically rinse and repeating the same bullshit that they did last year. Like literally I was talking to someone, I am going to do this diet. And I'm like, but you did this diet last year and you didn't lose the weight. And it was like one of the extreme diets. And again, I think that finding one thing that is going to address the root cause for yourself, because if you're not addressing the root cause for yourself, finding a program that is going to help you, ideally speaking, we would love for everybody to be able to figure shit out on their own. People keep on telling themselves, oh, I know what to do. I know what to do. No, you don't, because if you did it, you'd have done it. If you have nothing to show for, you ultimately do not know what to do for the season of life that you're in right now. Maybe you knew what to do as a fitness competitor, as a college student who wanted to binge drink every weekend and starve for the whole week in order to have a six pack. Cool. But now is a different season of life. And just because you worked then, it doesn't mean that it works now.
Well, that's like saying you know how to do your oil change on your car. That makes it, unless you're an expert in the industry, you're not going to do it.
I wouldn't do it. I'm a big fan, a big believer of hiring people who have gone before me and who are experts and have taken the time to, and this is not even like to talk about the Powerhouse Academy or anything like that. Although obviously if you want to join us, hello. But I think it is just because people are looking for that quick fix. Like we've had, oh my goodness, I didn't know that it wasn't going to be overnight. Well, it's not.
When I speak to people, I would like them to look at the big picture. Your right now is not ultimately what we're looking to truly base our life on. It's the big picture of what life can offer going forward. And I speak very heavily to women in general, as far as our goal is not the today and the tomorrow. It is to be able to be mobile, functional, and present at 60, 70. I have been saying on repeat, I want to be able to get up off the floor at 80 years old the way I do now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my goal is, being 42 years old and still doing what I do, because I'm seeing my children grow. And right before my eyes, my son is turning into a man, and I know there's going to be grandchildren real soon. And I want to be able to be super present for my grandchildren.
Yeah.
And how is that going to happen? Not with the quick fix, with the lifestyle adoption. But I also want my children to be able to raise their children without any sort of need for potential psychological support, which is going to come down to me, giving them the resources and tools to know how to do this thing called life on all levels, from movement, nutrition, which ultimately nutrition too dictates our ultimate mental and emotional capacity too.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what I was reading. I was reading something about like what you're doing right now, because I feel like people are very short-sighted whenever it comes to the time frame that they want for the results right now, and the effort that it's required. Because anybody that says that change doesn't require effort, it's lying. I mean, we can make the change simple, but simple and easy are not the same thing.
And you wanting your change right now, that's ultimately selfish.
It's not allowing you to become the person you need to become to maintain that change. And what I was reading is that everything that you do now is an investment on who you are tomorrow. And I did a presentation a few days ago, and one of the ladies asked how she could help her grandmother, who is 80, with the joint pain and the back pain and all the pains. And then I was like, I'm not sure you can do much to help her now, but what you can do, you can help yourself to minimize the joint pain, the back pain, the leg pain, all the pains. But it starts now, because a lot of people just try to mitigate the problem once it has blown up. And then you have a number of problems, because then it leads to even more resentment, because you haven't taken care of yourself. Your health is declining. And now you expect your children to then pick up the pieces and be the poster child of servitude that you were, even if it comes at the cost of their own well-being. So you're not breaking the cycle.
Right. And our jobs as parents is to release our children from our responsibility, teach them properly, give them the resources and tools and the knowing and the understanding, and then let them go.
Yeah. To be decent, members of society. Sometimes I see stuff and I'm like, I think my kids are getting a head start, because holy crap, like some of the things I hear, I'm like, is this the kind of stuff that my kids are going to have to deal with when they grow up? Like, I can't. Yeah. It's hard out there.
Hard.
Well, Jen, this was awesome. I loved this conversation. Obviously, like I said, we are going to be having more conversations like this. Super excited, because I think it's going to give an insight for people who are not in our community. And even for the people who are in our community, I think you always felt like we were Superman, like you never saw Clark Kent and Superman in the same place. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the times that, apart from the Powerhouse Summit, it's normally like you or me. So I think that this is a very good opportunity for people to see how we communicate and how we work together. And if you have any questions and you're listening, or any topic that you'd like Jen and I to cover here, please, there is a fan mail link in the show notes. You can send me a message on social. You can send an email, but just let us know what you want us to talk about with Jen's experience and expertise on the more clinical side of counseling. I think it's going to be incredibly valuable, and we're here to serve you. Thank you, Jen. Any topic that you think we should talk about next time?
Oh, goodness. So many. If we're going to incorporate, of course, the idea of young adults into the mix. I think ultimately the extracurricular sports and that type of thought process that can trigger.
Oh, that's our next one. There is it, the extracurricular activity. Well, Jen, thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to leave your review down below. Tell us what you want us to talk about. And that's how you're paying us back for our time, is by sharing your review, sharing the episode with your friends who might benefit from it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on social media, Instagram. Links are down below as well. And let me know what topics you want to hear more about, or who I should have on the show. This is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.